She was holding her newborn daughter in her arms when she was handed the divorce papers. Exhausted, weak, still bearing the marks of childbirth, and with the pain of betrayal pulsing in her chest. He didn't just leave her, he humiliated her, tried to erase her story, to crush her dignity. But what he didn't know was that in that very moment, more than just a mother was being born. A woman was rising, determined to start over from nothing. No one is ever ready to be wounded at the exact moment they most need care. Marina had just given birth. She was fragile, emotionally exposed, her eyes still brimming with a mixture of exhaustion and love, and it was at that exact moment that Eduardo chose to act. No warning, no compassion. He walked into the room holding a folder, his eyes cold, like someone who had made up his mind a long time ago. It was a divorce petition. A blow that stole her breath and shattered any trace of humanity in that sacred moment. Some people don't understand the value of a moment. Eduardo didn't just betray her, he timed his cowardice. Serving legal papers at the exact moment Marina was being reborn as a mother wasn't just abandonment, it was cruelty disguised as pragmatism. And the most shocking part? He didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He was already involved with Carla, his secretary, and carried the arrogance of someone who truly believed he had made the right choice. How many women have been silenced by actions like these, where pain is treated as a minor inconvenience? Marina felt the world break inside her, but no one else saw the damage. The nurses smiled, family sent congratulatory emojis, but inside, she was completely alone with a signature that marked the end of everything. And maybe you felt something similar, not the same, but that exact feeling of being discarded right when you needed someone the most. Funny how sometimes, the worst kind of pain is also the starting point of the biggest shift. Because what Marina didn't know yet was that what was coming would reveal more than she ever imagined. Some scenes are so absurd that, if they were fiction, they'd seem over the top. But Marina lived one of those moments, the kind only raw, unapologetic disrespect can create. Still stitched up from her C-section, barely able to sit up in bed, when the hospital door opened. It wasn't a doctor. It wasn't a nurse. It was Carla, belly showing, pride in her eyes, and a smug look of victory on her face. She didn't walk in like a visitor. She walked in like a conqueror. Like someone who came to seal her triumph at the cost of someone else's pain. The comparison was instant, cruel, and unavoidable. Marina, pale, exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes from fighting for her child's life. Carla, with makeup on, dressed to impress, flaunting her belly like it was a trophy. And Eduardo stood beside her, holding her hand, as if the hospital room were a catwalk and not a sanctuary for healing. Every gesture screamed, "She's my future. You're my past." The scene lasted only a few minutes, but in mere seconds, Marina's dignity was ripped away by a single glance. Some pain hurts not just because of what happens, but because of what it communicates. Marina wasn't just the woman who got cheated on. In his eyes, she was now a mistake. A leftover. A burden. And maybe the most devastating part was realizing that, even there, between the sterile walls of a hospital room where respect should be sacred, she was invisible. But what no one noticed was that, while they tried to erase her, something inside her was quietly waking up. Not every reaction to pain begins with rage. Sometimes, it starts with a plea. Marina, still fragile, her voice trembling, eyes wide with disbelief, didn't yell. She begged. She pleaded with her heart in her hands, soul exposed, like someone reaching out in the middle of a shipwreck. "Eduardo, please, not now. We can talk. We can try." But he didn't want a conversation. His silence was calculated. The coldness in his eyes was rehearsed, like someone who had waited for that exact moment to crush any chance of return. The words that followed weren't just rejections. They were blades. Eduardo didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't cry. He dismantled Marina with short, surgical sentences. "You've lost your spark. I've moved on." Lines that felt rehearsed in front of a mirror. There was no emotion. Only strategy. He wanted her to give up. To break. To fall apart, alone. And he succeeded, because something inside Marina cracked in a way that could no longer be hidden. But even in the midst of collapse, there was one fragile thread of humanity she refused to let go of: Sophia. Her newborn daughter was now more than just a baby. She was an anchor, a lifeline, a reminder that, despite all the chaos, something pure had come from her. Marina held Sophia in her arms, but it was her soul that clung to that tiny body like it was the last piece of her that still made sense. And it's strange how, when everything falls apart, sometimes it's the one who needs you the most that helps you find strength you didn't know you had. Some offers come disguised as help, but they're really declarations of disdain. Eduardo didn't just leave, he put a price on Marina's dignity. $300 a month. That's what he thought was enough for a mother with a newborn. Not even enough to buy formula and a few packs of diapers. And with that insulting amount came the ultimatum: you have 60 days to move out. 60 days. As if she were a guest. As if she hadn't helped build that life with him. Marina stared at that cold, heartless paper with a shattered heart. She had nowhere to go. No job. No one she could call for help without feeling like a burden. Single motherhood was already heavy enough. Now it came with the extra weight of abandonment, scarcity, and the urgent need to survive. Eduardo had planned it all. Leave clean, give little, fast forward his new life with Carla. And, as for her, she'd figure it out. That's the reality so many women face in silence. The sudden rupture of emotional, financial, and family security. And do you know what's most brutal? From the outside, no one sees how deep the hole is. To outsiders, it's just a breakup, a rough patch, a woman being dramatic. But to those living it, it's a minefield. Every choice made in fear. Every step taken in pain. Marina felt it in her body. But even in the abandonment, she began to understand. If she wanted to survive, not just exist, she'd have to find something inside herself that no one could ever take away. There's a kind of rage that doesn't scream, it burns in silence. Marina spent days in silence. Cried when no one was looking. Pretended to be okay so she could hold Sophia firmly in her arms. But something inside her started to boil. It wasn't just pain. It was indignation. A mixture of shame, humiliation, and injustice. Eduardo hadn't just thrown her away, he truly believed she wouldn't rise again. That she'd sink. And that very thought became the spark. He's going to regret underestimating me, Marina whispered quietly, as if making a pact with her future. There were no witnesses in that small room, no audience applauding her decision. But in that moment, something stronger than mere anger was born. Courage. A raw, unshaped courage, but one pulsing nonetheless. Marina had no plan. No support network. But now she had a reason. And sometimes, that reason is what separates those who rise from those who stay on the floor. She looked at Sophia and saw a reflection of what she wanted to build. A daughter who would one day be proud of a mother who refused to be destroyed. A woman who would prevail, without ever needing to return the blow in kind. This is where many people stumble, confusing revolt for revenge. But Marina didn't want to destroy Eduardo. She wanted to rebuild herself. To prove, to him and to herself, that she didn't need scraps or pity. And above all, she wanted to prove that she could be reborn without seeking anyone's permission. Still, courage, even the noblest, needs tools. And it was then that Marina decided her next chapter would be powered by something she had never prioritized before. Some pains aren't delivered with punches, they come in calculated gestures. Marina returned to her old home to collect her last belongings. Crossing that space was hard enough, every corner filled with memories of her life with Eduardo. But what she didn't expect was to find Carla there. Barefoot, relaxed, barking orders at the staff as if she were already the lady of the house. No trace of embarrassment. No sign of respect. Her presence was a silent declaration. You've been replaced. But the real low blow came next. As Marina packed Sophia's clothes, she overheard Carla casually on the phone. There's no child in my house. As if Eduardo's daughter never existed. as if Sophia were an inconvenience to be erased. Marina froze. It felt like someone spat on her daughter's very existence. Her blood boiled, not for herself, but for that little girl who didn't even know what rejection was yet. And in that instant, something in Marina shifted. Without raising her voice, but with the determination of a mother carrying her daughter's name in her soul, she replied, "Don't you dare pretend my daughter doesn't exist. As long as there's even an ounce of dignity in me, you won't erase her." It was the first time Marina met a gaze without looking away. The moment she refused to swallow her pain. It was the birth of the woman awakening within. Because she understood, in that instant, that her fight was not only about survival, it was about memory, justice, presence. And from that point on, nothing would stay silent. Some men, when they lose control, don't argue, they intimidate. Eduardo knew Marina was vulnerable. He knew she hadn't stood back up yet, and that's why he issued his most cowardly threat, to challenge Sophia's paternity. "I'm not sure this child is mine," he said, coldly, playing dirty. It was a direct attack, not just on Marina, but on the one thing that kept her standing. The goal was clear: silence her, break her, make her give up the fight. This legal tactic was vile and perverse. Eduardo knew Marina couldn't afford a lawyer. He knew she survived on donations, favors, improvisation. This paternity challenge was just another way to silence her through poverty and fear. And this is how many women are pushed to rock bottom, not by physical violence, but through bureaucratic manipulation. Anyone who's had to prove the obvious in court knows the kind of agony it brings. The agony of having your truth questioned while the other person flaunts their power. But Marina was no longer the same. Her pain had become a scar, and humiliation had turned to alertness. Yes, she trembled. Yes, she cried. But she didn't back down. Because she finally understood, what Eduardo wanted to wipe out was her voice. And it was precisely that voice that she was just beginning to discover. Not knowing how, not knowing who would stand with her, Marina promised herself she would fight to the end. And that's when she began to do something that, until then, seemed impossible. Not all evil comes with shouts. Sometimes it arrives with a polished smile, a neatly folded envelope, and words like, "This is the best we can do." This time, Carla came alone, saying she wanted to resolve everything in the best possible way. She presented an offer like it was a gift, $500 a month. But the devil was in the details. The sum came with abusive clauses. Marina had to sign a gag order. No contesting paternity, no inheritance, no rights. In exchange, pocket change, almost charity. Carla spoke with the calm of someone believing they're being generous. But Marina saw what many missed. It wasn't an offer, it was a trap. An attempt to tape a woman's mouth shut who was still clawing her way back up. Signing that document would be tantamount to saying, "I accept being erased." It would mean accepting that Sophia didn't deserve recognition or the future she was owed. And for the first time, Marina didn't hesitate. She tore the paper to shreds. Her anger was now clear-eyed. She was no longer driven only by pain or bitterness. Her motivation was awareness. Awareness that what was happening to her is far more common than people think. They try to neutralize women through exhaustion, necessity, and legally disguised coercion. But now she knew her worth. And that awareness opened a new window. If she wanted justice, she'd need to learn to fight with the right tools, and to find unexpected allies. When all seems lost, life sometimes offers you a helping hand where least expected, or long forgotten. Desperate and out of options, Marina swallowed her pride and reached out to Julia, an old college friend. They hadn't talked in years, not because of a fight, but because their paths diverged. Marina hesitated before ringing the bell. She was changed, wounded, marked. But Julia didn't see a broken woman. She saw someone she recognized behind the scars. They sat at the kitchen table as they did in the old days, and while Marina cried, Julia listened. With teary eyes and a vivid memory, she remembered the determined, creative Marina, the one who led projects, dreamed big, spoke passionately about architecture and financial freedom. And in that simple kitchen, Julia said something no one had said in a long time. You haven't disappeared, Marina. You were just buried by someone who tried to diminish you." Her words were both balm and shock. This reconnection helped Marina remember who she was before pain defined her. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a miracle. But it was the start of rebuilding. Julia didn't offer instant solutions. She offered something even more valuable: perspective. A chance for Marina to see herself again through eyes unclouded by humiliation. And that sparked a different flame. Because when someone believes in you, even after you've forgotten how to believe in yourself, it's sometimes all you need to take the next step. After so much time swallowed by pain and abandonment, a door opened for Marina. It wasn't grand, but it was real. Julia, recognizing a talent that never died, offered her a technical position in engineering. Something simple, but a starting point to reclaim what seemed lost. To Marina, the offer was more than a job. It felt like a sign that, despite the wounds, there was still room for her to shine at what she did best. Her first client was Roberto Silva, a rigid, demanding businessman who didn't hide his skepticism seeing her after all those years. The professional reunion was tense, but also liberating. Gradually, she proved that her competence and expertise remained intact, even if her body and soul had weathered a storm. The spark Eduardo tried to snuff out began to blaze again, this time, stronger than ever, grounded in experience and her unwavering will to win. Marina learned that the path back to her identity isn't immediate. It's built step by step, client by client, challenge by challenge. Each completed project, each answered question, was a brick in rebuilding her self-esteem. And most importantly, she no longer needed anyone's approval to know her worth. This career resurgence was only the beginning of a deeper transformation that extended beyond her work and into her entire life. Life has a way of testing your hard-won strength. On a seemingly ordinary day, as Marina was regaining her rhythm, Carla appeared unexpectedly at Julia's house, holding Sophia in her arms. The audacity was breathtaking, as if someone had claimed that space and paraded her child like a trophy without permission. It shook Marina to her core to see that familiar face invade a refuge she believed was hers. But the greater surprise came later. Marina discovered that Roberto Silva, the client helping her relaunch her career, had ancient ties to Eduardo. It wasn't coincidence, nor chance. It was as if the shadows of her past still had hooks ready to drag her back, to remind her that, despite the steps she'd taken forward, her autonomy was still fragile. The news hit her like a weight, shaking the ground she'd slowly rebuilt beneath her feet. This revelation shook everything Marina had started to reconstruct. She felt control slipping through her fingers, the feeling of manipulation from afar, even as she tried to move on. It was a delicate moment where fear and resolve intertwined, and the real battle intensified. Because now Marina knew, winning wouldn't be just a matter of effort, it would be a fight to protect everything she had already reclaimed. Just when you think the worst is behind you, life shows you it's not over. Eduardo and Carla came with a further offer, $200 a month. An even lower sum, a direct insult to Marina's dignity. It was as if they tried to tell her that it was enough to keep her alive, and that she didn't deserve more. This offer wasn't just financial, it was a cruel declaration of power. A way to dig deeper into an open wound. And more than the sum, it was the attempt to undermine Marina's confidence. "Without us, you're nothing," they whispered, as if her strength depended on their presence. The arrogance of those believing they control destinies, who think they can define a person's worth with numbers and threats. But Marina, despite the fatigue and scars, recognized that this was the limit. The rules had to change. She could no longer accept crumbs, nor live in the shadow of those who tried to destroy her. That was her moment of rupture. The point where fear, pain, and rage fused into fuel for resistance. Marina was no longer the woman who knelt to beg. She knew she needed to forge a new reality, one that didn't rely on Eduardo or Carla's permission. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was certain: this fight was hers. Even the strongest have moments of doubt. Amid so much struggle, Marina felt an internal shadow grow, uncertainty about her own strength. She wondered if she could truly make it alone, if her courage would survive the next storms. Those doubts aren't weakness, they're signs that we're alive, searching for our way in uncertain terrain. Often, it's in those moments that the mind becomes a betrayer, whispering we might not be enough. It was then that Julia became more than a friend, she became a mirror of truth. With warmth and firmness, she reminded Marina of the shine she always had. Julia said that what Eduardo did was to hide that shine, like turning off a light just to make himself feel stronger. You haven't lost your worth, Marina. You were just manipulated by someone who should have valued you, she said. Those words were a breath of hope, a light in a dark room, that helped Marina see beyond pain and doubt. That conversation was pivotal. Acknowledging that insecurity is part of the process, and that she still carried immense strength, helped Marina start seeing the future differently. Not as a victim, but as a woman tested and, though weary, ready to find herself again. And that rediscovery could only lead to something greater, a transformation beginning to take shape on the horizon. There comes a moment in life when you have to choose which side you're on. Marina looked at the paper before her and felt the weight of a decision that meant far more than money or a signature. It meant her dignity. She took a deep breath, and for the first time since that storm began, she felt in control. She would no longer accept scraps. She would not give up what was rightfully hers. She would not let anyone else write her story. The decision was made. She wouldn't sign anything that silenced her. More than rejecting an unfair deal, Marina made a silent promise to herself. She would fight. In court, in life, in every moment she needed, until her voice was heard and her daughter received what she deserved. The courage that once glowed faintly was now a fierce, uncontrollable flame, ready to light even the darkest corners of her battle. And deep down, she knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was absolutely necessary. This choice marked the beginning of a new phase. A phase of resistance, justice, and rebuilding. Marina was no longer the woman bent before pain. She was a warrior, determined to reclaim not only what was taken, but her identity and the justice she longed for. And as with any profound journey, this one was far from over. It was simply the beginning of a chapter that promised to surprise. After so much pain and struggle, the moment arrives when you finally recognize yourself. Marina looked in the mirror and, for the first time in a long while, saw more than scars. She saw strength, courage, and a woman ready to rise from her own ashes. Her gaze carried the firm decision of someone who learned never to diminish herself again. It wasn't just about proving something to Eduardo. It was about proving to herself that she was whole, valuable, and deserving of everything life could offer. This rebirth didn't come from a stroke of luck, but from every battle fought in silence, every tear shed when nobody was watching, every difficult step taken when her body begged for rest. Marina swore to herself that Eduardo would make the biggest mistake of his life in trying to erase her. Because she would not just survive, she would thrive, rebuild her life, and show that true strength lies in rising when the world tries to bring you down. And in this emotionally charged, promise-filled moment, Marina's journey changed forever. The woman who was disbelieved, underestimated, and discarded became an unstoppable force, ready to claim not only the justice she deserved but the life she always dreamed of. Yet this story still holds many chapters and twists to come, because when someone decides to be reborn, the world will never look the same again. In the silence of her thoughts, Marina made a promise that would echo through every step of her journey. She would become so successful that Eduardo would never forget the mistake he made. It wasn't just about money or status, it was a declaration of personal power. She wanted to rebuild herself so completely that her victory wouldn't just be over her circumstances, but over the narrative they tried to impose on her. And for that, Marina knew she would have to work hard, learn more, and never allow herself to be diminished again. She started investing in herself like never before. Courses, books, support networks, everything that once seemed out of reach became her top priority. Marina understood that success doesn't happen overnight. It's built through small daily victories, through a quiet discipline that only those who've tasted defeat truly understand. The transformation she sought was total, professional, emotional, and spiritual. And as she focused on that, she began to open doors that had once been slammed shut, revealing to herself, and to the world, who she truly was. This promise of a new beginning brought more than just motivation. It brought purpose. Because her greatest victory wouldn't be the money in the bank or public recognition. but the fact that Marina was finally becoming the woman she had always deserved to be. And while the past tried to pull her backward, she moved forward with the unshakable certainty that her future was in her hands, a future she would build with pride, dignity, and the strength of someone who would never again let her light fade. There comes a point where words are no longer enough. You have to act. Marina, with the resolve of someone who had bled in silence for far too long, refused to sign any document that would erase her daughter's rights. She officially filed a paternity and child support lawsuit for Sophia. She knew she was stirring a hornet's nest. Eduardo was powerful, well-connected, and surrounded by people ready to protect him. But that didn't matter anymore. Marina wasn't fighting out of revenge. She was fighting for justice, dignity, and what was rightfully guaranteed to her daughter by law. She walked into the courthouse with her head held high, even though her legs were trembling underneath. Each step down that hallway was a reminder of how deeply she had been underestimated. But now she had evidence, witnesses, and most importantly, courage. The legal process would be long, tough, maybe even dirty. Eduardo and Carla would do everything to twist the truth, as so many do behind the system's closed doors. But Marina was ready to face it all. Because Sophia's life would not be marked by abandonment, but by a mother who fought until the very end. Taking it to court was more than a legal step, it was symbolic. It marked the turning point of a woman who used to accept things in silence, and now spoke up, for herself and for her daughter. Every document she signed was a scream. Every scheduled hearing, a statement that she would no longer let lies be written as truth. And although she knew the road ahead would be full of obstacles, Marina also knew she wouldn't walk it alone, and that unexpected allies might show up when she needed them the most. When Eduardo's lawyer walked into the room, Marina was already bracing for the worst. But not even in her darkest predictions had she imagined the level of contempt she was about to hear. The offer was crystal clear: $500 a month, for just 2 years. No adjustments for inflation. No back pay. No mention of inheritance or Eduardo's assets. An amount that barely covered Sophia's basic needs. And yet, the tone was one of arrogance, as if they were doing her a favor. The lawyer spoke as if he were being generous, as if Marina should be grateful. The most outrageous part? Eduardo was hiding his real income. Omitted documents, manipulated statements, everything designed to make him look poorer than he really was. The same man who flaunted luxury vacations with Carla, imported watches, and a brand new car every 6 months, now pretended to be a low-income, absentee father. Marina clenched her fists under the table, trying to hold back her fury. It wasn't just about denying help. He was mocking her intelligence and her pain, as if she had no right to ask for more. But what Eduardo didn't realize was that Marina was no longer the fragile woman from a few months ago. She listened to the entire offer, looked the lawyer in the eyes, and said, in a steady voice, $500? Is that what he thinks his daughter is worth? Then I'll show the judge what she's really worth. Because in that moment, she understood, it wasn't just about money. It was about respect, truth, and justice. And when a woman realizes that justice is on her side, the game truly begins to change. Some decisions seem like madness at first, but sometimes, salvation is found in boldness. Marina knew that if she wanted to beat Eduardo in court, words alone wouldn't be enough. She needed proof. Real proof of his income, of the company's financial activity, of the hidden contracts swept under the rug. And that's when the plan was born: infiltrate Eduardo's company as a janitor. Yes, a janitor. In disguise, invisible. Just like so many others who go unnoticed in the halls of power. It was a massive risk. One misstep and everything would fall apart. But Marina studied every detail, used someone else's documents, and counted on the silent support of Julia and an old friend who worked at a third-party cleaning service. Within days, she was there, uniform on, gloves in hand, bucket ready. Cleaning the meeting rooms where she once sat as a wife. Emptying trash bins where now she found scraps of hidden contracts. No one recognized her. To everyone there, she was just another shadow pushing a cleaning cart. But behind that anonymous badge was a woman with sharp eyes, a photographic memory, and a greater purpose. Marina began collecting everything: printouts left behind at the copier, open emails on abandoned screens, half-finished phone conversations. Every day in that company was a new chapter of tension. But it was also silent progress toward the truth. And soon, she would have in her hands the right weapons to flip the script and prove that underestimating a determined woman might be the biggest mistake of all. The worst kind of pain doesn't always come from words. It often comes from the look that pretends you don't exist. Marina lived that every day. Wearing her janitor's uniform, she walked the halls of the company like part of the furniture. No one greeted her. Most looked away. Some even dropped papers on the floor right in front of her, as if her presence implied automatic submission. And Carla made a point of reinforcing that humiliation every step of the way. She looked Marina up and down with disdain, parading her superiority like a medal. Carla seemed to know, instinctively, that this invisible woman was a threat. Not because of status, but because of courage. More than once, Marina had to take a deep breath, swallow her pride, and keep cleaning the very room where she had once been welcomed as a wife. She saw Carla smiling beside Eduardo, discussing business strategies, sitting in a place that once was hers. Every laugh from Carla was a test. Every cruel command, a blow. Once, Carla even spilled coffee on purpose and, with a bitter smile, said, "Looks like you missed a spot, sweetheart." But Marina endured it all with a single thought in mind. This is temporary. The pain now is the price for tomorrow's truth. She turned every humiliation into fuel. Because there was no more room for wounded pride, there was a greater plan in motion. And even if she was invisible in everyone else's eyes, she knew she was about to be seen for who she truly was. A woman who had endured contempt, lies, and abandonment, and was now ready to deliver justice with her own hands. Every journey has a turning point, and Marina had finally reached hers. After weeks of walking through cold hallways and being looked through like she didn't even have a soul, fate placed in her hands what no one could have imagined. On an ordinary night, while cleaning one of the executive offices Eduardo always kept locked, she found a forgotten folder. Inside, hidden contracts, undeclared statements, transactions that proved an income far higher than what he had disclosed in court. It was like finding gold buried in garbage. But one final piece was still missing, Eduardo admitting it in his own words. And that part, Marina knew, would take more than luck. It would take ice in her veins. She discreetly left her phone recording in one of the offices while she cleaned and silently watched as Eduardo took a call. In between arrogant laughs, he said, "Of course I hid the money. She doesn't deserve a cent more. If she wants it, let her prove it." Those few seconds were worth a lifetime. Marina grabbed the phone with trembling hands, knowing that what she held wasn't just audio, it was the key to turning everything around. That night, Marina didn't sleep. She watched the files over and over again, crying from relief, rage, and the feeling of a long-awaited victory. Because now, she no longer relied on assumptions. She had proof. She had truth. She had a voice. And Eduardo, so sure of his own impunity, had no idea he was about to face the very woman he had tried to erase. Only this time, she had all the evidence to show the world who he truly was. The road to justice is slow, but once it starts moving with truth in hand, it becomes unstoppable. Marina walked into her lawyer's office with the folder under her arm and her heart racing. She sat down across from him, took out the documents and phone recording, and said, with a steady voice, "Here's everything." He flipped through the papers, listened to the audio, and looked at Marina without hiding his astonishment. "With this," he said, "we can claim everything you're entitled to." In that moment, Marina didn't smile, she exhaled. As if surfacing for the first time after nearly drowning. The case took a whole new shape. With the new evidence, the lawyer filed an immediate motion to revise the support order, including retroactive payments for the months Eduardo pretended to be a struggling father. The new child support could reach $3,000 a month, an amount that meant stability for Sofia and dignity for Marina. But more than that, it represented respect. Every dollar in that legal calculation was a small reparation for the silences she was forced to swallow, for the humiliation she endured, for the sleepless nights. It still wasn't the final victory, but it was the first great win for someone who had been buried alive and dug her way back to the surface. Marina knew Eduardo would fight back, would try to use the power he still had. But now, she wasn't alone, and she wasn't defenseless. Now, she was being heard. And this first step opened doors to something even greater, because what Marina wanted to build wasn't just justice for herself, but something much deeper. Life has a strange way of flipping the script, and sometimes, the one who pushed you off the cliff ends up falling too. Carla, always confident in her throne beside Eduardo, began to notice cracks forming. A forgotten message on his phone. A bank account under another woman's name. The same pattern of lies. The same playbook. The man who used Marina as a stepping stone was now doing the exact same to Carla. And that's when it finally hit her. She wasn't special, she was just the next one. The game she helped build had turned against her. In a move Marina never would have predicted, Carla showed up at her door. No makeup. Red eyes. Holding her daughter in her arms. For the first time, no arrogance, no sarcasm. Just someone shattered, the way Marina once was. Her words came slowly, with effort. I was used to. He lied to both of us. I want to help bring him down. Marina stayed silent for a moment. It was strange to see this woman, her personal enemy, now speaking of alliance. But there was something different in Carla's eyes. Was it true remorse, or desperation? The proposal was bold. Join forces, share evidence, corner Eduardo for every abuse, lie, and fraud he'd committed. Marina didn't fully trust her, but she also knew how to recognize when the wind was shifting. Because sometimes, even the one who hurt you can help expose the real villain. And in this new phase of the battle, Marina realized that justice doesn't choose perfect allies, it chooses the willing. And Carla, no matter how contradictory, was now part of something bigger than both of them. When someone destroys you from the inside, revenge can feel tempting. Carla wanted Eduardo ruined, publicly, financially, emotionally. She spoke with fire in her eyes, as if his destruction was the only way to heal her own pain. We need to destroy everything he has, she said, firm and bitter. But Marina, even with deeper, older scars, took a deep breath and answered with something Carla had yet to learn: balance. Because for Marina, what was at stake was far greater than revenge, it was Sophia's future. She knew that choosing vengeance might bring instant relief, but would leave a trail of chaos that could hurt her daughter too. And she had seen enough, felt enough, to want no more destruction. I don't want to see him broken, she said. I want to see him held accountable. Her focus was clear. Justice. Legal. Concrete. Transformative. Not driven by hate, but by love. The love she had for herself, and for the little girl who still needed her to define what was right. This choice wasn't a sign of weakness, it was proof of growth. Of someone who understood that true victory isn't about watching the other person suffer, but about freeing yourself from the need to watch them suffer. Marina wanted to close that chapter with dignity. She wanted Sophia to know, one day, that her mother didn't seek revenge. She won. With truth, with evidence, with honor. And while Carla still chewed on the taste of vengeance, Marina was already taking the next step toward something greater. After everything she'd been through, from hospital tears, to janitorial humiliation, to the long legal fight, Marina finally stood at a crossroads. And this time, the choice was hers. She didn't want to just survive anymore, she wanted to live with purpose. So she made the most resolute decision since Sophia's birth. She would return to being an engineer. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to reconnect with what she was born to do. It was time to leave behind the cleaning rags and pick up blueprints, drafts, and dreams again. She updated her resume, scheduled meetings, looked for mentorships, and pursued something many had already given up on. A dignified job, aligned with her true profession. Some said it was too late, that the market was cruel to women who'd stepped away. But Marina knew her absence had a price, and a reason. And now, with everything she had lived through, she felt more prepared than ever to face any boardroom, any client, any technical challenge. Because more than knowledge, she had grit. Every form she filled out, every interview, was an act of courage. And deep inside, one truth had taken root. She no longer needed anyone's last name to open doors. Her name, her story, her resilience spoke for themselves. Marina knew the road ahead would still demand everything from her. But this time, it was different. Because for the first time in a long while, she was choosing for herself. And that choice, full of clarity and strength, was just the beginning of a brand new chapter. The interview was held in a modern, imposing office filled with young people boasting impeccable resumes. Marina arrived with her shoulders back and her heart pounding. This wasn't just another interview, it was her chance to finally show, loud and clear, who she really was. The technical challenge came as the final step of the selection process. A structural problem that younger engineers had already tried to solve, but failed. Some gave up, others guessed. Marina, calm yet sharp, asked for paper and a ruler. While everyone around waited with disdain, she drew lines with surgical precision. She calculated angles, distributed weight, thought beyond the obvious solution. She remembered old professors, past projects from college, real construction scenarios that demanded improvisation and cool-headedness. In less than 40 minutes, she presented a functional, economical, and safe solution. Not driven by hate, but by love. The love she had for herself, and for the little girl who still needed her to define what was right. This choice wasn't a sign of weakness, it was proof of growth. Of someone who understood that true victory isn't about watching the other person suffer, but about freeing yourself from the need to watch them suffer. Marina wanted to close that chapter with dignity. She wanted Sophia to know, one day, that her mother didn't seek revenge. She won. With truth, with evidence, with honor. And while Carla still chewed on the taste of vengeance, Marina was already taking the next step toward something greater. After everything she'd been through, from hospital tears, to janitorial humiliation, to the long legal fight, Marina finally stood at a crossroads. And this time, the choice was hers. She didn't want to just survive anymore, she wanted to live with purpose. So she made the most resolute decision since Sophia's birth. She would return to being an engineer. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to reconnect with what she was born to do. It was time to leave behind the cleaning rags and pick up blueprints, drafts, and dreams again. She updated her resume, scheduled meetings, looked for mentorships, and pursued something many had already given up on. A dignified job, aligned with her true profession. Some said it was too late, that the market was cruel to women who'd stepped away. But Marina knew her absence had a price, and a reason. And now, with everything she had lived through, she felt more prepared than ever to face any boardroom, any client, any technical challenge. Because more than knowledge, she had grit. Every form she filled out, every interview, was an act of courage. And deep inside, one truth had taken root. She no longer needed anyone's last name to open doors. Her name, her story, her resilience spoke for themselves. Marina knew the road ahead would still demand everything from her. But this time, it was different. Because for the first time in a long while, she was choosing for herself. And that choice, full of clarity and strength, was just the beginning of a brand new chapter. The interview was held in a modern, imposing office filled with young people boasting impeccable resumes. Marina arrived with her shoulders back and her heart pounding. This wasn't just another interview, it was her chance to finally show, loud and clear, who she really was. The technical challenge came as the final step of the selection process. A structural problem that younger engineers had already tried to solve, but failed. Some gave up, others guessed. Marina, calm yet sharp, asked for paper and a ruler. While everyone around waited with disdain, she drew lines with surgical precision. She calculated angles, distributed weight, thought beyond the obvious solution. She remembered old professors, past projects from college, real construction scenarios that demanded improvisation and cool-headedness. In less than 40 minutes, she presented a functional, economical, and safe solution. Not driven by hate, but by love. The love she had for herself, and for the little girl who still needed her to define what was right. This choice wasn't a sign of weakness, it was proof of growth. Of someone who understood that true victory isn't about watching the other person suffer, but about freeing yourself from the need to watch them suffer. Marina wanted to close that chapter with dignity. She wanted Sophia to know, one day, that her mother didn't seek revenge. She won. With truth, with evidence, with honor. And while Carla still chewed on the taste of vengeance, Marina was already taking the next step toward something greater. After everything she'd been through, from hospital tears, to janitorial humiliation, to the long legal fight, Marina finally stood at a crossroads. And this time, the choice was hers. She didn't want to just survive anymore, she wanted to live with purpose. So she made the most resolute decision since Sophia's birth. She would return to being an engineer. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to reconnect with what she was born to do. It was time to leave behind the cleaning rags and pick up blueprints, drafts, and dreams again. She updated her resume, scheduled meetings, looked for mentorships, and pursued something many had already given up on. A dignified job, aligned with her true profession. Some said it was too late, that the market was cruel to women who'd stepped away. But Marina knew her absence had a price, and a reason. And now, with everything she had lived through, she felt more prepared than ever to face any boardroom, any client, any technical challenge. Because more than knowledge, she had grit. Every form she filled out, every interview, was an act of courage. And deep inside, one truth had taken root. She no longer needed anyone's last name to open doors. Her name, her story, her resilience spoke for themselves. Marina knew the road ahead would still demand everything from her. But this time, it was different. Because for the first time in a long while, she was choosing for herself. And that choice, full of clarity and strength, was just the beginning of a brand new chapter. The interview was held in a modern, imposing office filled with young people boasting impeccable resumes. Marina arrived with her shoulders back and her heart pounding. This wasn't just another interview, it was her chance to finally show, loud and clear, who she really was. The technical challenge came as the final step of the selection process. A structural problem that younger engineers had already tried to solve, but failed. Some gave up, others guessed. Marina, calm yet sharp, asked for paper and a ruler. While everyone around waited with disdain, she drew lines with surgical precision. She calculated angles, distributed weight, thought beyond the obvious solution. She remembered old professors, past projects from college, real construction scenarios that demanded improvisation and cool-headedness. In less than 40 minutes, she presented a functional, economical, and safe solution. The woman so many doubted was now responsible for coordinating teams, signing strategic decisions, and being the main voice in negotiations. But amid the excitement of the new contract, a bittersweet revelation came. The rival company, also bidding to lead the project, was Eduardo's. Seeing his name on the documents, time seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Not out of fear, that was gone, but because of what that moment symbolized. Years ago, Eduardo controlled Marina's fate with a cold signature. Now, she was about to outdo him with her own signature. But one made with conscience, ethics, and merit. Fate, as capricious as ever, had placed them on the same battlefield, but in completely different positions. Marina led. Eduardo competed. The selection process was public, transparent, and technical. Marina didn't need to attack, lie, or manipulate. She just had to be who she was, competent, prepared, and trustworthy. And there, in that silent contest, she realized her greatest revenge had already happened. Being there, on equal footing, looking down on the man who once trampled her. But the best part was yet to come. Because the final decision on this project wouldn't just change the course of a company. It would crown a story of pain, courage, and justice. For 7 days, Marina barely slept. Every detail of the project was reviewed with surgical precision. Calculations, charts, virtual models, everything had to be flawless. Not just because it was a $500 million contract, but because she knew who would be watching. She knew Eduardo would be there, facing her, expecting to see her broken, hesitant, less than before. But he didn't know what she had become. Marina was ready, not to prove something to him, but to make clear to herself that this was her place. The day of the presentation arrived. The competing companies lined up in the auditorium, each waiting their turn to defend their proposal before the evaluation committee. When Marina entered the room with her team, blueprints, and screens ready, Eduardo lifted his eyes and froze for a few seconds. It wasn't the kind of surprise you can hide. He muttered something to his partner, trying to keep composure. Marina, meanwhile, simply walked to the stage, confident, serene. There was no resentment, only the firmness of someone who came to win. When the moderator asked the next company to present, Marina stepped forward and said, clearly and proudly, "Representing Construtora Horizonte, I am Marina Santos, partner director of the project." The silence that followed was like an invisible trophy. Marina didn't have to look at Eduardo. The sound of her own name, said with confidence and power, was enough to confront him with a reality he never imagined. The woman he tried to erase now shone brightly on her own. The room was full, but as Marina spoke, time seemed to stop. Her voice was steady, her gaze direct. She presented a bold, sustainable, modern project, but above all, human. While showing the technical solutions, she also spoke of social inclusion, dignified housing, safer communities. Every detail reflected not only her engineering knowledge, but also the vision of someone who knows what it means to start over from scratch. The panel leaned forward, attentive. Some even smiled, impressed. Marina wasn't just presenting, she was delivering a revolution. Eduardo, on the other hand, looked smaller than ever. When he took the stage with his team, his usual arrogance seemed to mask growing discomfort. His project was functional but cold, big but empty. The committee's questions unsettled him. The numbers didn't add up. The ideas were recycled, outdated. The comparison was inevitable. Where Marina offered vision, he delivered more of the same. And for the first time, Eduardo felt what it was like to be mediocre in front of someone he himself tried to destroy. Hours later, the result was announced. Marina had won. Not by luck, nor by narrative, but by competence, by dedication, by vision. She had secured a $500 million contract leading the company that once embraced her. While the Horizonte team celebrated, Eduardo left silently, eyes empty, pride in ruins. Marina didn't seek his gaze. She was far too busy accepting congratulations, handshakes, recognition. Because there, in front of everyone, her victory wasn't just professional. It was historic. The sun was already setting as Marina crossed the parking lot of the event center, contract papers still in hand, heart calm like never before. But just steps away from her car, she heard a voice she knew better than she wanted to. "Marina, wait." Eduardo approached with a worn expression, unstable gaze, like someone seeking redemption or control. He tried to start with, "I was wrong," but she cut him off gently yet firmly. "You freed me, and I thank you for that." He didn't understand, but she understood everything. She didn't hate him. She had just moved on. As Eduardo tried to justify the unjustifiable, Marina held her ground. There was no more anger, no need for confrontation. The real reckoning had already happened, in court, on the streets, on the presentation stage. And now, also in her heart. Before getting in her car, she left one last sentence. "I rebuilt my life without tearing you down. But you lost yourself trying to stop me from growing." Eduardo stood still, motionless, watching the woman he tried to erase walk away, stronger than ever. Days later, the final ruling came, Full custody of Sophia awarded to Marina. Justice served. Everything she endured, betrayal, humiliation, emotional and financial misery, had turned into a solid foundation for something greater. Now, with her daughter in her arms, a rising career, and the past finally buried, Marina understood that the true triumph wasn't defeating Eduardo. It was having defeated herself, day by day, until she became everything he said she never would. 2 years. Only 2 years had passed since that night in the maternity ward, when Marina was left holding a newborn and a divorce request in her hands. Today, it was impossible to look at her and imagine that scene. The cover of the leading industry magazine, Construction in Business, featured her face, with the words, "From invisible to national reference in civil engineering." The image showed more than a successful engineer. It showed a woman who built, with her own hands, the empire they said she'd never have. The article spoke of her projects, her innovative solutions, her human and firm leadership. It also told her personal story, the fall, the fight, the turnaround. It was read in universities, shared on social media, discussed at conferences. Marina had become a symbol of resilience. She was sought after for interviews, invited to open conferences. An inspiration for women across the country who saw in her not an exception, but a real possibility. Her voice now shaped narratives, influenced decisions, moved structures. And the most beautiful part? Even with all that recognition, Marina was still the woman who picked Sophia up from school with a snack in her bag and eyes full of pride. She knew where she came from. She knew how much it hurt. She knew what it cost. And that's exactly what made her story so powerful. Because her name wasn't just respected anymore, it was remembered. And with it, a silent lesson echoed. Never underestimate a woman who was left on the ground, and chose to rise by building her own path to the top. The weeks following the magazine cover were a whirlwind. Marina could barely keep up with all the proposals coming her way. Major construction companies, both national and international, wanted her to lead their projects. Some offered sums that seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. But she didn't get dazzled. Her partnership with Horizonte was more than a contract, it was a symbol. She had helped transform that company, and now, together, they were winning bid after bid. 15, to be exact. All fiercely contested against the same company, Eduardo's. Each victory was silent. Marina didn't celebrate with fanfare, but her soul felt at peace. Time was showing who was who. And while Horizonte expanded, Eduardo's name began to lose strength in the market. Clients grew suspicious, investors backed away. The man who once thought himself untouchable was now reaping the consequences of years of arrogance. Then the phone rang. The number was his. Marina looked at the screen, took a deep breath, and answered. On the other end, his voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. "Can we talk?" he asked. There was no arrogance. Only exhaustion, perhaps regret. Marina didn't respond right away. Not out of hatred, but because something more important was on her mind. It wasn't about Eduardo. It was about her. About Sophia. About the upcoming contracts, the new projects, the dreams that could finally come true. But at that moment, she knew. The story wasn't over yet. It was just about to close its cycle for good. Marina arrived at the cafe with calm steps, unhurried. The place was simple, nearly empty, unlike the luxurious halls where Eduardo used to flaunt himself. There he was, at a corner table, shoulders slumped, unshaven beard, and a lost look of a man who no longer commanded anything, not even his own life. He was unrecognizable. The man who once looked at her with disdain in the maternity ward now barely managed to meet her gaze. When she sat down, he didn't try to hide the decay. "I lost everything," he muttered. But Marina already knew. She didn't need him to say it, she could see it. For a few seconds, the silence between them carried more history than any conversation ever could. Then Eduardo spoke, his voice trembling but sincere. "I'm sorry. I didn't end things with you because I stopped loving you. I ended things because I feared you. You were stronger than me, more honest, more determined. And I didn't know how to handle that. Marina didn't cry or feel anger. She just listened. And inside her, something aligned. Because the pain he caused had been real. But now, so was the acknowledgement. She replied calmly, "You didn't destroy me. You set me free." And at that silent table, there was no audience, contracts, or spotlight. Just two destinies that had taken opposite paths. Marina, with her quiet strength, embodied everything he tried to stop. Truth, merit, consistency. And though forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, at that moment, she understood. This was the end of a cycle, but also the chance for something new to begin. Something that had nothing to do with revenge, and everything to do with legacy. Eduardo expected a redeeming gesture, maybe a ready-made phrase to close his own ghosts. But Marina wasn't there for that. When he asked for forgiveness, as someone seeking relief more than true pardon, she took a deep breath and said gently but firmly, "I won't lie to Sophia." There was pain in that choice, but also an integrity he never had. Marina wouldn't pretend there was peace where none yet existed just to ease someone's guilt. Because, for her, forgiveness wasn't a favor. It was a process. "You don't owe me just an apology, you owe me a path," she continued. "Forgiveness isn't asked for with words, Eduardo. It's earned with actions." Marina didn't shout or humiliate. She spoke with the calm of someone who learned to listen to herself after a long time of silence. And in that speech was a deep lesson. Not everything can be fixed with apologies. Some wounds heal, but leave scars. And Marina wouldn't pretend everything was fine just because now he was fragile. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Before leaving, she concluded with a peaceful look. "I don't hate you, but I won't carry the weight of what you did." Eduardo lowered his head. For the first time, he understood he would no longer have access to her heart. Not as a father, nor ex-husband, nor friend. Marina walked to the door without looking back. She no longer needed him to see her. She just needed to keep living. With lightness, truth, and the dignity she rebuilt brick by brick. Marina never imagined that beyond rebuilding her local life, her journey would take her beyond borders. One day, executives from a major French construction company visited Horizonte's office, impressed by her innovative work and strategic vision. The meeting was marked by deep conversations about global engineering challenges, sustainability, and social impact. They hadn't come just to meet. They came with an offer that would change everything. To lead the company's expansion in America. The offer was generous and clear. Not only in million-dollar figures, but in recognition that Marina was a leader ready to operate on a global stage. The invitation to lead projects in various countries represented not only professional validation, but the chance to expand her legacy beyond borders. It was the ultimate proof that her story, marked by pain and overcoming, now inspired respect and admiration internationally. The trust placed in her was, in fact, a mirror of how much she had transformed. This proposal opened a new chapter, full of bigger challenges, but also infinite possibilities. Marina felt a mix of pride and responsibility. She knew she wasn't just accepting a job. She was embracing a mission involving culture, adaptation, and leadership in diverse environments. It was the final recognition that the woman once underestimated was now steering her own destiny. And there were no limits to how far she could go. Even facing this tempting international offer, Marina insisted on keeping the company's headquarters in the United States. For her, it was vital that success didn't mean abandoning the roots and people who supported her from the start. The decision reinforced her connection to the local community and her commitment to transforming the country through engineering and entrepreneurship. Marina wanted Horizonte to remain a symbol of genuine opportunity, where talent could shine on the global stage. Moreover, Marina made it clear she would hire engineers to lead the new projects. She knew the U.S. had brilliant professionals, many of them single mothers facing challenges similar to her own. Giving voice and space to these talents was part of the legacy she wanted to build. A legacy of inclusion, appreciation, and respect for national potential. This choice showed that leadership isn't just about results, but about real and lasting human impact. To materialize this social commitment, Marina created a foundation to support single mothers seeking to restart their careers, especially in technical fields and engineering. The foundation offers training, mentorship, and practical opportunities, helping women rebuild their autonomy and self-esteem. It was her way of turning her own story into collective strength. A bridge so other women could also raise their dreams, step by step, with dignity and hope. In an intimate conversation with Julia, her longtime friend and confidant, Marina delved into the depths of her purpose and legacy. Between cups of coffee and memories of the past, they discussed the true meaning of success. Not just accumulating wealth, but creating something that impacts lives, especially those of women fighting to rebuild their paths. Julia reminded Marina how she had transformed pain into fuel, and that this French offer wasn't just an opportunity. It was a chance to expand her reach and change even more stories. Marina reflected on the sacrifices she had made and the challenges she still faced. She knew accepting the invitation meant navigating unknown waters, far from the safety of familiarity. But she also understood her legacy needed to cross borders, that her mission was bigger than herself. Between doubts and certainties, she decided to accept the offer, but with conditions that ensured her roots stayed strong, and her social commitment remained unwavering. This moment of decision represented more than a professional choice. It was a conscious step toward a future where Marina wouldn't just win for herself, but open doors for thousands of other women. Closing that conversation, she felt an inner peace that only those who know their true worth can experience. And without realizing it, she was ready to write the next chapter of her story. A chapter about purpose, courage, and global transformation. The lights in the Grand Auditorium in Paris dimmed for a moment. When they returned, a voice announced, "And the Engineer of the Year award goes to Marina, from the United States." The applause was immediate, overwhelming. Marina walked onto the stage with teary eyes and a heart bursting silently. Every step there was a memory. The maternity ward, the hospital room, the janitor's cart, the divorce papers. Now, before world leaders, she embodied the impossible made real. A living symbol that starting over isn't weakness, it's strength disguised as pain. Her speech began with a held breath and a steady voice. "This award is not mine alone. It belongs to all the women who have ever been discredited, silenced, or discarded." Marina spoke of single motherhood, injustice, emotional rebuilding, the lonely journey, and the courage born from rock bottom. And, in a gesture of greatness, she moved the audience as she said, "I dedicate this recognition to my daughter, who gave me a reason to fight, to my friend Julia, who reminded me who I was, and even to the man who tried to destroy me, because he was the one who gave me the push that made me fly." Silent tears ran down faces in the crowd. Marina wasn't seeking pity, she was sharing power. Her speech was not just about engineering, but about humanity, overcoming, forgiveness, and transformation. There, before the world, she sealed her story with honor and courage. And while the flashes lit her face, she didn't think of fame, she thought of the invisible mothers everywhere who urgently needed to hear, "You can start over. And you can win. Because no one has the right to define you, only you." The cycle finally closed, not with screams or trophies, but with meaningful silence. Marina no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Her image graced university murals, social projects, engineering firms. But her true victory wasn't in the headlines. It was in the steady gaze before the mirror, in that whisper that said, "I made it." From a woman abandoned in the maternity ward, humiliated in the hospital, and erased in her own home, to a global symbol of female strength and resilience. Newspapers called her an icon of modern engineering. But women worldwide saw something even greater, one of their own. Someone who fell and got up. who was silenced and chose to speak, who was discarded and chose to bloom. Marina became an inspiration not because she succeeded in the market, but because she triumphed within. She didn't let pain harden her, nor did she lose herself in thirst for revenge. She chose justice, dignity, and hard work, and transformed her life into a bridge for other women to walk across. In the end, her greatest achievement wasn't fortune, recognition, or international awards. It was the reunion with her own essence. The rediscovery of that dreaming girl who once believed she could build great things, and finally realized that the greatest construction of all was herself. Marina was no longer a victim of her own story. She was the author, and the legacy she left the world lives on in every woman who dares to start over.